Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my podcast. Today is going to be an interesting one because I will be interviewing a woman I'm honored to know because she's actually my supervisor for my honors research project. Her name is Amanda Williamson. She's a highly educated, highly knowledgeable woman who is an urban planner and and a lecturer at WITS who has taught me for quite a couple of years now. She also has a lot of experience and knowledge on community engagement, so I was really looking forward to what she had to say. Please sit back, relax, and listen to her knowledge because this is quite a lengthy one, but I know it's worth it.
Okay, so I just wanted to thank you again. Thank you very much for accepting my interview request. I think that your experience, thoughts, and expertise will be very insightful to my topic, which is discussing the power imbalances in community engagement in urban planning and how they're actually addressed. So, my first question to you, Amanda, is what is your understanding of power imbalance in urban planning?
Thank you very much, Tandek. I thought all the questions that you sent through were really interesting. I realize I'm not a professionally, well, a sec plan registered planner, but hopefully I sort of qualify. Anyway, in terms of power imbalances in planning, well, I mean, I, I I don't just simply recognize that they're there. I think it's a sort of a fundamental state in society, and it always has been, and that it's essential for urban planners, any planners in the sort of built environment, sort of natural environment or whatever, to be aware that power exists. I like the way that Foucault talks of power, that power isn't static, it's dynamic, it moves through people, actors, communities. Uh, it changes according to context and time, everything. So for having said that, I I think that understanding urban planners need to recognize not just that it's there and to take it sort of as, well, it's one of the factors, it is sort of the foundational, it's a fundamental state. And planners need to go beyond just being aware of it to actually almost sort of like analyzing it always. It's not static. It's in every context there will be power dynamics, and they will not and everybody will not have the same level of power. There will be, sometimes it will be sort of like a, I suppose it's a legitimate, or it's a an explicit power imbalance. Okay. So, for example, in a situation where I'm a lecturer and you're a student, or I'm a supervisor and you're the researcher, um, the amount of power that I have is greater than the amount of power that you have. You are seeking information, understanding from me. So it's not equal. And that's what I would regard as, so it might be imbalanced, but it's not equal. But it's visible. It's basically sort of like understood as the social contract. But I think to go beyond that is to recognize that there are these hidden inequalities, to recognize where power is vested and how it is moving and how it is operating in a particular and sort of a social space or a political engagement. You're going to be asking me about community engagement. And I think that those things are necessary. In many kind of, I suppose it's, maybe I'm getting on to the next one, but around community engagements, or
Yeah, that's okay.
yeah, discussing getting involved in almost like planning for community participation or engagement with different community groups, is that one of the first things is to map out the political and institutional dynamics. And that is a recognition that needs to be understood. But what I'm saying is that it always needs to almost be at the forefront of a planner's mind. So that's my understanding of power imbalances. So for example, there might be power, perhaps what might be not sort of invisible power imbalances, or ones that are not expressed. They might be unvoiced. And those are more difficult. I mean, you might sense them at almost at an intuitive level, and you're going to ask me that in question 5, I think. Nobody's going to say, well, Amanda, you're not equal to me because you're not a man. But those things might be emerging, that might be there. And for me as a planner or involved in a planning process, I will need to respond to that and work out how to draw power to myself, or equalize it in terms of, or not equalize it, but to work with it. Yeah, that's probably my response to the first one. And to me, Foucault's interpretation of power, I think, is very, very helpful. And I think that it really helps almost any kind of social or political engagement. Who is holding the power? What is happening here? And if you don't understand that context, you stumble in.
Yeah, definitely. No, I agree, definitely. And I feel like context also plays a role in power, because I mean, with the supervisor and researcher example, I, your power is working towards my advantage. It's to help me. It's not to quiet, to take away my voice. But then you do get, like, I think politically, I think in one of the modules, one of the lectures, they did mention that sometimes maybe a politician would have more power over the decision made, like a planning decision made. They'd have more power over the actual planner, which was quite crazy to me.
Yes, but yes. Yeah, so sorry, in terms of this situation where you're the interviewer and I'm the subject, you have more power
Yeah.
than me. It's
Yes,
true. You're
true.
holding all the cards, and what you've done is to give me the questions beforehand, which
Yeah.
is very generous. You've explained where it's come from. So at the outset, you have thought through what the interaction is about. And I like the way in which you've talked about it. We're looking at things, so you might be responding to the power imbalance, or the power relationship. Let's call it a power relationship between lecturer, student, supervisor, researcher. You need me. I wouldn't be a supervisor and a teacher if it wasn't for you. So there is
Oh, yeah,
it's a relational kind of thing. It's not to say that there aren't
definitely.
structural inequalities, that power, that whatever power dynamics, they keep on getting reinforced, and that's what we need to work to recognize and shift. And so what you've done in preparation is you are using that term as leveling the playing fields, making it more of a conversation,
Yeah,
not, and
definitely.
so yeah, we are able to have this. The other thing is that we know each other,
Yeah.
so it's I think what I'm trying to do is to go, well, yes, Tom Decker, now you know what I'm talking about. You've done it already.
Yeah, exactly. But I know, I like how the way you explained it, I actually didn't think about it, is that even though there is a power imbalance, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be helpful, because usually when I think about that, I think of one has power over the other, and one is excluding the other. But you've actually used examples that show that it can be in a relation. What's the word you used? But yeah,
It,
it's a
yeah,
relationship
it
that
is in
helps.
a relationship. There are relationships, and
Yeah.
both parties, the power. So it could be the powerful. The powerful only have power if they can dominate, or
Yeah.
they have power
Yeah.
over, by themselves. Power doesn't work unless it's in a relationship. Yeah.
True. Okay, let me move on to the next before we get
Mm.
off topic. But yeah, so the next question is, from your experience, what have been some of the challenges you faced or faced by planners when addressing these power imbalances in community engagement? And to speak off of what you were previously mentioning about how planners should be more aware, like we should acknowledge that there is going to be a power imbalance. Is that one of the challenges? Do planners sometimes not acknowledge that they have way more power influence over decisions and not acknowledge enough of the community's opinion?
Yes, I think that there are so many examples, and I'm sure I've been part of them, that um, you go in and you think you know what's happening, and you might have done a whole sort of institutional, political mapping of the area, but and that might almost be subconscious, and you go in as I'm an expert, and I think that that's always there. You're going
Yes.
in to do a certain kind of a job, and I think that particularly in consulting and sort of private practice, when planners or experts are brought in to say, assist a municipality or an international funder to undertake work, you're very much drawn in from the outside, and there is a job of work to do. So ultimately, in those things, the power is held by who is funding it, who is the main thing, and the ultimately the responsible body. And so with community engagement in those situations, I was a consultant for several years, working with communities, working at a sort of a regional, sub-regional level. Um,
Nice.
so I've
Nice.
got some kind of background in it, and I think that from my experience, one of the things is that you do. I recognize I came in as an outsider, and my job was a lot of it was just setting up workshops or meetings, and facilitating that process. And it was, setting things up, and I suppose orchestrating things, almost like choreographing, orchestrating workshops so that we would get what we wanted. And what we wanted would be information, data, it would be achieving understanding. So in some, it would be ultimately through a whole set of meetings and workshops that would be coming up with, say, a vision or a set of strategies or ways in which projects could be undertaken. So there's always a particular goal. And that's not really so. I think going in is that you go in with something quite specific, and you are very much at the mercy of all the elements, which is, whether the councillor likes you
Yeah.
or not, who might be gatekeeping the process, um, and uh, and then who then is coming to the meetings, and from the get-go it's unrepresentative. It's, people have been bussed in. There are only certain people who've been able to come for one reason or another. It's happening at the wrong time of the day or the week or whatever. And often a lot of people who attend these kinds of workshops have come because they have their own interests to pursue, and the interest might be, well, there's a meal, okay, or I'll be able to meet the councillor there, And so, and I know in these workshops, I could feel these relationships working out, and as a facilitator trying to, shape discussions back to where they needed to go. And there were workshops being held. And this was in the early days of integrated development plans. And
Yeah.
um, it was finding out what people's needs were, and it was a hugely comprehensive kind of workshopping. And we would go in for several days and meet in rural areas with communities, and sometimes there would be translators. And there were these really, for me, it was so interesting because I felt I was the outsider. I was gathering so much information, and people were being so generous. And there were, in the discussions, they were very nuanced about understanding things. And so uh, and also recognizing that my assumptions, because I would try and sort of blank out, what my assumptions would be. My assumptions would be nobody will understand me. They don't want to join this. They'll disrupt the process. A whole lot of basically
Yeah.
neuroses. Um,
Mhm.
and also people might be illiterate. They might not have been part of these kinds of processes before. Nobody speaks, or it's only certain people who dominate. And taking this notion of this relational understanding of power, holding all of that, being responsible to come up with a certain, product at the end, but also, being kind of at the mercy, or, just being with it as it's all happening.
Yeah.
So yeah, some of the challenges were recognizing that not everybody was there, and working with what we had.
Mhm.
Um, uh, the other thing was that feeling like an kind of an intermediary, a cog in the machine, which was there were funders, there was the client, which would have been the municipality or some other organization.
Yeah.
And they were, they would determine the time frame, everything. So they would say, this is the budget for the participation process, and it needs to happen between A and B. That's it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and knowing that that was the case, that there were those kind of defined boundaries, and even though knowing that it would ultimately only be quite superficial, and the moment this part of the project was done, have no more contact with any of these people again, knowing full
Yeah.
well in my all my understanding of planning, it should be an ongoing process. You establish relationships and trust, da, da,
Exactly.
da. So my and I that was certainly my experience as a consultant. This weird situation that I felt like I had the least power. I could do a whole
Yeah.
lot of juggling.
And you
Uh,
knew the most,
and
probably.
I'm kind of like, I have my skills, and I have to deliver on the one hand, but on the other hand,
Yeah.
it was how do I extract what I need, but also to respond to people's generosity, in time and effort, and thoughtfulness, and also just sharing knowledge. And these
Yeah.
encounters would be remarkable. I still, think of them today. They are almost fundamental to my understanding of planning. So one of my assumptions could be, people won't want to be, or don't understand this process. And those kinds of things were shifted in sort of like the first 10 minutes of a workshop. And uh,
Yeah.
I think in that the um uh, the I mean, obviously somebody who's setting up the meeting and who is orchestrating it does have a certain kind of power. But those kind of neurotic worries I had beforehand was also how fragile that was, and it could go in any which way. There would usually also be a member of the municipality or the organization there just to make sure that I was doing the right thing. But all of these things are very, very complex. And you constantly
Yeah.
sort of like keeping your eyes out, and there will always be somebody in the meeting, in the workshop, that is causing trouble or, doing something. And the trouble is not that they're a bad person, they are
Yeah.
messing up the time.
Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
over my experience, it's you don't go in completely overstructured. It has to follow certain things, follow what is actually happening there, and it's about respecting that process and also respecting who is in the room and who they are. They're making a connection with you. You're making a connection with them, and it is those kinds of engagements are incredibly social encounters.
Yeah.
And yeah, anyway, so that's a very lengthy way of describing some of my experiences. So it's not really cut and dried. It says, well, poor communities, really get the raw end of the deal. Yes, they do.
Mhm.
In structural terms, there are these huge political sort of power inequalities, social, economic, but actually, as a practitioner in the field, it feels very different. Um, and as a result, these kinds of engagements are incredibly exhausting. They require every resource you have as a human being. Yeah. Anyway,
Definitely. You've definitely emphasized how complex it is, and unfortunately, at the end of the day, you can't make everyone happy.
no,
Mm.
no. And you know
Yeah.
that it's not going to be fully representative in that workshop. You're
Yeah.
not going to cover everything. It really is just a snapshot in time. People haven't been able to voice their opinions because of other dynamics that pre-exist,
Yeah.
your workshop. Um, and nobody's going to be entirely happy, ultimately, including including me as a somebody as part of the
Exactly. That's
process.
a profession. Yeah.
Which is, well, did this reflect what we were doing or what people were asking and things like that? Yeah.
True. Then on that note, do you know of any approaches or strategies that planners have used to make sure that they're being as inclusive as they can in community engagements in South
Uh,
Africa specifically? Yeah.
There have been um, there have been loads and loads of different kinds of experiences and initiatives, um, and some of them have been documented, and some of them sort of just pretty much happen on the spur of the moment. And I think that the most successful ones happen at a project level, at a in a particular sort of territory and area, that it's set up as a housing project or infrastructure upgrading, and so that and it's going to happen, for a fairly long time, and there are different kinds of, I suppose, development vehicles that are set up, and so. Uh, and there will be sort of representative forums and things like that. But in those, it is happening over a longer period of time, so that there is often either an office, or there are people who are within the community, or they might be planners who are constantly on the ground, engaging in, say, an upgrading project. And to me, that kind of community engagement, that kind of really hands-on project, that those encounters are far more meaningful and far more inclusive.
Definitely, I agree.
Yeah, and
The longer,
yeah,
yeah, I'm sure the
and
longer time you spend with the people you're planning for, the easier you'll understand them and more correct
yes,
you'll get their needs.
yeah, and they will come to you because if you are a conduit to a municipality or an organizational funding, you will be the person, how do we fix this? How can we do this? How can we do these other things? And so it's not just a one-way
Definitely.
street. Um, uh, and in those instances, finding out that the community isn't just one big homogenous blob. There are, all kinds of things going on, and it happens over time, and different events might shake things up. Things like municipal elections, ward-based elections, the death of somebody, all of these things start. So you're really kind of embedded, not you don't become part of the community, but you become embedded in that particular project. It's yeah, so I think that those are far more meaningful. They can be a lot more inclusionary.
Inclusive. Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
always going to be so in those kinds of things. And I was part of a I think board of trustees or something, and the way, and it was a housing, so one of the housing RDP housing projects of funding for, I think it was institutional funding, and it was in an sort of an informal, sort of almost like rural urban interface just outside Durban, and it contained 2 wards, and there were two ward councillors. And so in a way they were the gatekeepers. Now gatekeepers has a whole lot of bad connotations, but that was how it was done formally, and um, there are protocols. But I mean, that project probably took 8 years easily.
Oh, I wasn't
And
expecting that number.
oh yeah, oh yes. And there will be different phases of the project. So it would be, like getting the land released and going through Ngunyama Trust and all kinds of things. And so your involvement with the whole process is much deeper. And that was as a planner, as a trustee. So I wasn't employed, it was voluntary work. And then also in my experience as somebody working in the municipality, there is a little bit more, I suppose, power there because you have a particular job description, that you
Yeah.
have a little bit more. So I haven't gone into that. I thought most of the work I did with communities was as a consultant. The kinds of
Nice.
things, so there are all kinds of different, I suppose, forums. The most deadly boring were the IDP representative forums. They're terrible. Terrible.
What?
There was no community engagement. They're just awful. Um,
Oh my
uh,
gosh.
um, there was an EU project in, I think, 4 in many of the provinces in South Africa. It was trying to look at local economic development, and their approach was to, so we were there were a number of us groups that would be the facilitators of different workshops. And so we do this political institutional design, which was a bit weird because we you know, we didn't really know who everybody was. You find that out as you go along.
Yeah.
But it was about
Yeah.
drawing together representatives of different sectors. So it might be small farmers, small farming sector, or large scale forestry, or tourism, or people in bed and breakfast establishments. And that was very interesting because you're looking at representatives, bringing them together. So it's not meant to be like the whole community. And those were really exciting. And again, they weren't particularly, you know, they were partially inclusive of the different interest groups. You know, no, they were interest groups. They were representative of interest groups and sort of themes, but obviously not everybody.
Yeah.
But we had a fairly good idea that what was coming up were the main issues, and we could talk through them. And those were absolutely
Yeah.
fascinating, because it wasn't just saying, what do you need? It was talking through a whole lot of other things. And there was a particular methodology that we were given by the EU, their consultants, and it wasn't working. So I changed it, and I can't quite remember how I changed it. And there was an EU person there going, "Oh, you can't do this, Amanda. You can't do this. This is far too risky." I said, "But it's working. You know, it's working. Let's just go with it. Nobody else knows
Exactly.
that this is what must happen." Oh, but you can't put
Yeah.
those people in the same room. They have different political parties. It's like, no, but we're asking them something which, you know,
Involves all
is
of this, probably.
involves all of them. Let's just see what happens.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
it actually worked. Oh, you can't take risks like that, Amanda. So sometimes you just, you know, you do just have to, I suppose in that sense, I didn't like being told what to do, and felt that my involvement with these different groups, which was far more direct, I could build on that.
Yeah.
So that's
Exactly.
also, yeah, so it was more about experience rather than expertise, but it was also having a face-off with the client, which was, yeah, probably
Yeah, you're very
unprofessional, but
brave.
it was like, no, but you know, I felt that as a planner, I was there. My interest was in the broader community. It was about local economic development. The route to it was through
Definitely.
all of these other things. Yeah, so I was just kind of looking at that overall goal rather than, you know, following the
Nice.
steps. Yeah. So it was
Sometimes you
also
can.
using that, you know, finding out where I could claim some power, and
Yeah.
and
Definitely.
using it and saying, no, I'm defending my position. You know, I'm not, don't.
Yeah, using it for the greater good.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And because it worked, I mean, it was a risk, but basically everything in that project felt risky. You know, it's like, you know, anyway.
Yeah. Okay, I just check with you if you're still okay with time, because I know we're over time, but yeah, we
Okay,
aren't
I've probably got
done yet.
another 10 minutes.
Okay. I guess we
Yes.
could just maybe, I think the
Yeah.
next one you kind of answered in most of your questions about like what are the key steps that need to be taken at a policy or institutional level to create a more inclusive and empowering community engagement process. Because you
I would
mentioned like,
very simply answer that, Sandek, and I'd
yeah.
say I think that there's plenty of policy. I think that institutionally there are probably all the right kind of things in place.
Hmm.
Systems
Practice,
have
that's the
sometimes
problem.
worked. There are also examples all around South Africa, you know, where certain things have been piloted,
Mm.
but haven't been taken forward. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we've got it in our constitution, just about in every policy, you know, it should be more inclusive and more empowering. Um, it's much more about doing that and really taking it
Yeah,
forward. And
actually
that,
putting it out. That's so
yeah,
true. Everything is it's a good idea theoretically
yeah,
out
yeah,
there, but then
yes.
actually practicing it, it's a different story.
Yeah, and I think what you'd said right at the beginning, which is context matters,
Yeah.
and the policy can say do all of these things, and it can be down to you must do this first and that, and then the next thing, and it must follow these steps, otherwise it's wrong. But actually, the way in which that cookie cutter approach, you know, is done as wrong, because in certain circumstances it's irrelevant or inappropriate, or sometimes it fits really well, and those kind of things can't actually be, the idea about being context sensitive. I mean, those two words, with a hyphen in between, really the big
Definitely.
important thing, and those
Yeah.
do come up in policy, and it's really about, I suppose, the skills and willingness and the capacity, to take that forward, and perhaps to take certain kinds of risks. Yeah.
Definitely. Hopefully, the next generation of planners can do better.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's
But
quite difficult. I think it's quite difficult. I think things become very polarized. I think it's probably far more difficult now. I think when I was doing that consulting, everybody was finding their feet. This was in the,
oh yeah,
well, post 1994. It was like we just, and
it's just starting.
experimentation. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it was great. I mean, we weren't doing but risky was experimenting, trying certain
Yeah.
things, trying all kinds of different approaches, and that was so exciting. That was very exciting.
Well, I'm glad you find excitement in it as well. It's not just about, oh, this is so difficult and so complex. You actually enjoy
Yeah,
figuring it
yeah.
out.
Yes, and it's hard, and it's exhausting, but
Yeah.
it's that I think that's why we can't get ChatGPT to do planning. AI won't be able to do those kinds of things, and I think that
You need
those
real
are
people.
you need to get real people in real situations. Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah.
And then, yeah, my last question, if you want to answer it as a woman in the urban and planning profession, this is just
Mm.
out of interest, yeah. But yeah, do you feel like you have less power than men in the field since it is still quite male dominated?
I was thinking about this, and I'd like to just say no, but I'd also say yes. Ugh.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
and I think it
Elaborate.
would. um, I think that when I was a young woman, I felt that my age had something, and my lack of experience. So it wasn't just I was a new graduate, but I just didn't have experience. I didn't know the ways of
Yeah.
the world, and so I did have less power, but when people made a big deal of it, and yes, they were white men, it wasn't nice. It made me feel very
Yeah.
uncomfortable. Um,
Hmm.
and sometimes it was people who were in sort of they were in positions of greater authority, like a city engineer or the head of a department or whatever. But yeah, so but I
With
thought that was
experience.
more about my age or lack of experience than anything
Yeah.
else. Um, there were, um, yeah, I think my race, my whiteness, has
Mhm.
certainly been an issue of being a white woman in traditional authority areas.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and as a black woman, as a black man, it would be to a large extent the same, except
Hmm.
if you knew the language.
True.
If you couldn't
True.
understand what was going on, you just have to look humble and shuffle around quite a lot, prodding the person who does know what's going on, saying, "Has this been done?
True.
Has we talked about this?" Um,
Well,
so
that's definitely
yes, I think
important,
it's
like
very
having
intersectional.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's a whole range of things, and in this one, it was a training for this EU program when we were doing the sort of the designers of the process were telling us
Yeah.
the methodology, and they were two older white men, And I think that there was probably one younger white man there, and most people were Black women and white women. And the examples they gave tended to be of white men's sports and like the language and the kind of like space they took up in the room. I found that quite alienating to me because I didn't share those interests, and I thought they weren't reading the room. That they would
not
make
at all.
jokes and things like that, which everybody else would go, "Oh, it's not really funny." And so what actually happened was that we all bonded.
Over that.
Yeah, it's just like we're all, and of course there is that power thing between the people who are running the workshop and the participants. And
Yeah.
this is, I mean, and that's another kind of power, is that when you are all in a less powerful position, you can band together and you can be passive,
And take
but you are
power.
performing passivity. Whereas at the same time, in the tea breaks, you're going, oh my goodness, what an idiot. And so there's you're just because you're being treated in a certain kind of a way, you're not just taking it. You look like you're taking it, or you're just not responding, but actually you are, and you're doing something which is a little bit more, what is the word? It's not necessarily disruptive, but it's counter to there's a kind of activeness in resisting or not buying into that kind of thing. So
Definitely.
that's also happened, and that's happened in, say, for example, in the municipalities that I've worked in or with. You just have to bite your tongue, and that there's casual racism, casual sexism. I mean, I'm white, so I'm privileged, in terms of the apartheid past. But I also take offense if, there's somebody who is using casual racism, wouldn't even, it's a joke, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So there are all these different kind of layers, and perhaps, I'm being oversensitive. But I think that a lot of men,
Oversensitivity is better than no
yeah,
sensitivity.
yes, exactly. They would have been able to say, yes, we've taught them that. And we were going, didn't really like that. I'm sure we'll do better workshops.
True.
Yeah, so I can't think of the word, but it's this kind of, you perform passivity, you respond in a way that's not actually as powerless as you might appear. I think also, for example, at the university, this is going beyond urban planning, but we are part
Okay,
of
no
the
problem.
establishment, and
Oh
many years
yeah.
ago there were fees must fall, and this, who do you side with? Do you have to side with somebody? Where do your, and so just going back to my original thing, there are these, I suppose, these barriers or restrictions. There's a boundedness to how you can, I suppose, use or draw power, or you work without it or with less of it, and you just have to kind of like make your peace with it, and it is difficult, because it's not easy to say, well, it's easy, you're powerful, you're powerless. The range and the shifting of that is difficult. And it would be really nice just to be able to say, oh, I think, I just don't think like that. It doesn't involve me, but as you probably found out, that once you started on the urban planning route, rural development route, everything matters. Yeah. So
Everything. Oh my
yeah,
God.
absolutely
That's so
everything.
true.
Yeah. So I think that no, I haven't experienced direct discrimination. I think that planning and many of the engineering fields are getting more and more women. They're more female students, there are more graduates, there are more women operating, and it certainly changes things. And there are older women in positions of, say, as a city planner, and so it normalizes. Not to say that all women, will support other women, but yeah, I think that that's changed significantly over my life as a planner.
Yeah, definitely. And with more experience, probably comes
Yeah, and I'm part of
more
that old
knowledge and
guard.
more power.
Yeah.
Nice. No, thank you so much, Amanda. I think everything you said was so insightful. I learned so much, and I feel like my listeners will hopefully enjoy it as well. So thank you so much for doing this interview.
Thank you so much, Tandeka.
Thank you for listening, everyone. I hope you interact and watch the next episode.